Okay, this is Earl Morrall, and I'm sure that there are only a select few of you guys out there who actually know who this guy is. But trust me, nobody throughout the entirety of NFL history has ever had a career as weird as Earl Morrall. So when I made this video on whether Super Bowl III was rigged or not, also go watch that video after this one, please, I thought that I knew a fair amount about NFL history. I had thought that Joe Namath defeated Johnny Unitas and the Colts in Super Bowl III. Well, to my surprise, I found out that Johnny Unitas was not the quarterback for the Colts that year. It was Earl Morrall, and it was crazy to me that history had almost entirely wiped Morrall's name from the NFL history book. So please, allow me to convince you why this guy, Earl Morrall, had the weirdest NFL career ever. This story starts even before he was drafted, as in high school, Morrall was an extremely coveted multi-sport athlete, as he led his high school team to a state championship in 1951 as the best player on his team. Next year he did it again, this time in baseball. Yeah, that's right, he was also somehow the best player on his baseball team, and as well as leading his high school to another state championship in 1952, this time in an entirely different sport. Huh. He then went on to Michigan State and won the Rose Bowl in 1956 as the starting quarterback. Morrall also just so happened to play in the 1956 College World Series, and in fact, he was still so good at both sports that he was given the choice to play whatever sport he wanted professionally, even basketball. He chose football, and thus the weirdest career in NFL history was born. Earl Morrall was an extremely valuable prospect going into the 1956 NFL draft, so much so that he was drafted second overall, but not before a guy who primarily played punter for his entire career was drafted before him. I shit you not. The Pittsburgh Steelers took a guy who primarily played punter first overall. And I tell you this because the Steelers will be very important later on. Just remember that they passed on Earl Morrall. Anyways, he would be drafted to the 49ers at the number 2 overall selection and would be the backup quarterback behind veteran Y.A. Tittle. In his rookie year in the league, Morrall played sparingly and threw for about 600 yards, a touchdown, and 6 interceptions. But overall, Earl Morrall barely played, so the coach just said fuck it and moved Morrall to the team's permanent punter to get him some more playing time. Right. So after the season's conclusion, Morrall had some confidence in himself, and he was ready to build upon an unpredictable first season. But the 49ers didn't see it that way, as they traded Earl Morrall as well as another player to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Yep, the team that just a couple months earlier decided they thought a punter was more important than a franchise quarterback decided to pull a full 180 and send multiple assets just to try and undo their mistake. Good to see some things in the NFL never change. Anyway, going into the next year, Morrall was a bit confused, and rightfully so. But I guess he found his home in Pittsburgh as the team made the mistake of passing on him in the 1956 draft and paid a hefty fee of 2 first-round picks just to get him back. So Morrall played the whole season, throwing for about 2,000 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions. And after improving in almost everything in his second year, Morrall had finally found his home in the NFL. But because it's Earl Morrall's career, nothing makes sense, as after the season's conclusion, the Steelers traded away the guy they just gave up multiple draft picks for to obtain another quarterback from the Detroit Lions. Of course, this was no ordinary trade, because on that day, the Steelers and Lions created arguably the most infamous trade in NFL history, which just so happened to include Earl Morrall in the deal, as Bobby Layne would be traded to the Steelers, allegedly cursing the Lions for the next 50 years at least. I already talked about this situation in this video, so if you want to learn more about the Bobby Layne curse, then watch that video after you finish this one. Anyway, at the very least, what are the chances that Earl Morrall gets traded twice in 2 years after being the second overall pick and is put in a trade that plunges an organization in a 50-year losing drought? But somehow we're not even scratching the surface on Earl Morrall's career path and how quickly things just become downright weird. But for now, the next 10 years or so of his career would be rather uneventful. Well, relatively speaking. Morrall would be a journeyman for the next couple of years, but these years weren't completely boring, I guess. As he bounced around from team to team, he ended up suffering multiple, supposedly career-ending injuries for his time, but was somehow never driven out of the league. He ended up racking up countless countless injuries like a broken shoulder, broken wrist, and multiple concussions, just to list a few. And for an old quarterback in the 50s, these injuries weren't easily dealt with, and back then, doctors would just treat these injuries with a pack of cigarettes and some dirt. But in the 1968 season, 12 years after being drafted, his career changed forever when he was traded to the Baltimore Colts for an undisclosed draft pick. From the outside, this trade seemed insignificant, because it was. Morrall had been traded for scraps multiple times before, and this was just a repeat of history. But once again, because it's Earl Morrall's career, absolutely nothing is normal. At this point in his career, he was completely washed, if you can even say that, because he was never a very good player to begin with. So it's safe to say that nobody expected him to do anything with his career at this point, and even the Colts who traded for him didn't expect him to get any playing time. But in the 1968 preseason, the NFL decided to test out a new heavier football called the night ball. The NFL players were not used to the night ball, but the NFL officials demanded the players used it in the preseason as they wanted to experiment with an easier to see ball for television viewers. Because these players never practiced with this ball and weren't used to it at all, Colts quarterback Johnny Unitas ended up tearing the muscles in his arm, knocking out the best player in the entire league at the time for the entire NFL season, which meant this guy had to step in and lead the Colts for the entire season. Morrall was very old at this point, and the Colts organization knew their season was doomed once Unitas went down. But here we are again. Throw all logic out the window, and Earl Morrall leads the Colts to a mere 1 loss in the regular season and wins league MVP. What? He threw for about 3,000 yards and 30 touchdowns that year, an absolutely absurd number for even his time. And he wasn't done yet. No, not even close. They went on to destroy everyone in the playoffs, winning their conference championship game with a 34-0 slaughtering of the Browns. Once again, some things never change. Anyways, this win set up Super Bowl III between this guy's Colts versus this guy's Jets. The Colts were heavily favored and had the biggest point spread in Super Bowl history, but in order to stay on track with Earl Morrall's career path, Morrall reverted back into rookie form and played terribly, even getting benched for a still injured Unitas in a monumental upset to the New York Jets. But like I said, I made a video on this already, so there's no need to go further into this game. And like before, his career would dwindle down in his last years. He remained on the Colts, but in his intended role, a backup quarterback. But also like the previous years of being a journeyman quarterback, because it's Earl Morrall's career, something absolutely fucking bonkers happens. At age 37, he was ready to step away from the game until he got a call from Dolphins head coach and his previous coach, Don Shula, who wanted him to join his team as a backup quarterback. And if you're the starting quarterback of an NFL team and see Earl Morrall as your backup quarterback, you might as well just start digging your own grave, because you'll suffer some freak injury and Morrall will take your spot. But even if that does happen again, there's no way it can get any crazier than an MVP season and leading his team to they went 16-0. Undefeated. Earl Morrall, the journeyman quarterback who cursed an organization forever, started at punter, was traded twice in his first year, won an MVP, and possibly threw a Super Bowl, was the quarterback to the most dominant team in NFL history. And he wasn't just along for the ride either, as he won AFC MVP and Comeback Player of the Year. Kinda. He led his team all the way to the Super Bowl, where just like in Baltimore, Shula would pull Morrall from the game, and Morrall won a Super Bowl, but this time on the bench. And you'd think this would be the end of the 39-year-old's career, but no. He would go on to play 4 more seasons and would play until the age of 42. Remember that this is the 1960s and 70s, where technology is nowhere near as advanced as it is now. And at the time of his retirement, Morrall became the oldest player to win and start a game at quarterback. And after the 1976 season, Earl Morrall retired, leaving behind him the most complicated and weird resume throughout the entirety of NFL history. And like I said before, if you want to learn more about Super Bowl III or that Bobby Layne curse thing, then watch these videos here. They're really good, trust me. Anyways, until next time.